Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. This is the JR Resources team, also known as JRT meeting. So I'm going to play the role of Leah Landon this afternoon. Leah is on maternity leave and she's enjoying her beautiful baby. So I will try to do my best to carry on with the mission and hopefully carry the water the way she does it. So I hope all of you get an agenda, and we'll go through. I think we have enough time until 3 in the afternoon to go through all those items. And first of all, I'd like to do a sound check. Can you hear me okay? Everything is coming through okay? Thumbs up? Good. Okay. Sometimes we have some issues on the audio here in the boardroom. So first of all, let's go around and go through introductions. And I'll call your name based on the order that I have on my Brady Bunch screen. Patrick?
Good afternoon, everyone. Patrick O'Connor, Director of Thurston County Public Defense.
Christy?
Good afternoon, Christy Peters, Chief of Staff, Prosecuting Attorney's Office.
I have the Thurston County Correctional, I see Chief Toma. Introduce yourself and also who is with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all well and your staff are well. Todd Toma, Thurston County Sheriff's Office Jail Chief, and to my right is Captain Andre Mulder.
Welcome. Jason?
Jason B. Mortensen with Thurston Mason BHASO and the Thurston County Lead Program Manager.
Frankie?
Good afternoon, Frankie Peters, Court Executive Officer for the District Court.
Judge Wilson?
Good afternoon, Mary Sue Wilson, one of the judges at the Thurston County Superior Court, currently serving as our presiding judge. Hello, everybody.
Nicole Carbone?
Good afternoon, Nicole Carbone with Pretrial Services.
Kendall?
Hi, Kendall Simmons. I'm an MSW student interning at Thurston County Pretrial Services.
Mary Ann?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marianne Clear. I'm our Pretrial Services Director.
Commissioner Mejia?
Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner for District 1.
Nicole Miller?
Good afternoon, everyone. Nicole Miller, Racial Equity Program Manager.
Tanya?
Good afternoon. I'm Tanya Moore, the Court Operations Manager for Superior Court.
Thank you. John?
Hello, everybody. John Thunheim, Prosecuting Attorney.
Commissioner Minster?
Ty Menser, Thurston County Commissioner, District 3.
Under Sheriff?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Ray Brady, Under Sheriff over at the Sheriff's Office.
And last but not least, Carrie.
Good afternoon, Carrie Hennon, Public Health and Social Services Treatment Sales Tax Program Manager.
Hey, Carrie, you're coming very choppy, your connection, so just to let you know.
Sorry about that.
So this is an unusual meeting the way I started, because this is not a board meeting, it's operational meeting that we have had in the past. And that is why I host the meeting for all of you. So with that in mind, the first item on the agenda that we had is review the survey results. Leah sent all of you, I think a total of 26 individuals, a series of questions with the objective as to how we can prioritize and develop somewhat of a work plan for Leah and this group moving forward into the future. So Wayne, you just came in, you mind introducing yourself?
Wayne Graham from the Prosecutor's Office. Apologize about being a little late. Sorry about that.
Thank you. So the survey, and I believe there's an attachment to your agenda related to the survey itself. It identified 9 topic areas, It was the number of people in the jail for 365 days plus, the status of the female transition unit, the flex unit, and other options to address the need of additional beds, the need for additional programming in high-risk, high-need individuals, the need for additional diversion options for low and moderate risk individuals, the First Look program, the Resources Hub for justice impacted individuals, the use of electronic monitoring devices, lead updates, COVID-19 backlog updates, and the Blake decision updates. So we provided you with a ranking among all those 9 areas they have identified. It was a ranking from 1 to 5. 1 meaning not as important, and 5 meaning very important, the most important. So the result of the survey, we received 15 responses out of the 26 that we send out. So the result of those 15 responses give us an indication as to what will be the top 2 items, perhaps the group can start concentrating and start working on the next few months. With 62 points and came as a number 1 priority, no surprising, is the number of people in the jail for 360 plus days. So I think all of us can gravitate to that number 1 priority. Number 2, with 61 points overall, was the need of additional programming for high-risk, high-need individuals. That seems to be, to me, came as a very surprise, but certainly well-needed item. Number 3 with 59 points was the lead updates, COVID-19 backlog updates, and the Blake decision updates. Number 4, 58 points, the need of additional diversion options for low moderate risk individuals. Number 5 with 57 points, the status of female transition units. Priority number 6 with 56 points, that was the flex unit and other options to address the need of additional beds at the jail. Priority number 7 with 54 points, the use of electronic monitoring devices. Number 8 with 53 points, the Resource Hub for justice impacted individuals. And number 9 with 43 points was the First Look program. So with that in mind, obviously, we cannot tackle all the items that I just have described on this item. But maybe what we can probably concentrate is in the top 2. That would be the number of individuals at the jail for 365 plus days, and the need for additional programming for high risk and need individuals. I think that really encapsulates what the group needs to concentrate moving forward, at least in the near term. Without putting Chief Toma on the spot, could you provide perspective, Chief, on number 1 and perhaps number 2?
Okay, I'd be happy to, and I apologize if I'm a little out of sync. I wasn't even sure I was going to make it to this meeting today. We've got a number of issues going on, one of which none of us are immune to. We've got a pretty significant surge of COVID that we're dealing with right now. So if I have to step out, it's because I'm in consultation with Public Health and Dr. Abda Malik. So as far as the number 1 priority, the number of defendants in custody over 365 days, I agree with that being a significant priority. Currently, we have, as of the report that was put out on Monday, I believe, we have 27 defendants that are in custody for over 365 days. I believe when we met last, we did see a decrease, but again, these numbers are continuing. So I don't recall exactly when we met the last, but I believe the numbers were around 25. So we've seen a slight increase during that period. We did see those numbers decrease somewhat, but again, over a period of time, 2 months, 3 months, those numbers came back up again for those that are in custody. So any questions on that point?
Yeah, Commissioner Mejia.
Thank you, Chief Toma, for that report. So there's the 365. Has there been people that have been there for more than a year, like for more than 2 years?
Yes.
And what, out of the 27, how many?
We've got it broken down by total number of days, Commissioner. So I would have to do that math in my head, which isn't my strong suit. But I can tell you we have one defendant that's been here 1,994 days. We have another defendant that's been here 1,059 days, another defendant who's been here 1,020 days, another defendant at 757, 705, 671. So it goes down from there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, perspectives on this item before we move to the next one? And I know there is going to require to look holistically as the system, as to how we're going to be addressing these items. And it's not helping considering the backlog and everything else is just not on wrinkle, I believe, to start addressing the 365 plus. I think at some point maybe 2-3 years ago, we made a very good stride in terms of reducing those individuals. I think we got to a point of a single digits, if I recall well, at some point, obviously prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic just exacerbated the issue. Any other questions, comments to that? In the upcoming meetings, we'll start focusing a little bit more. And I would love to have your perspective from your individual responsibilities within the justice system as to how you see resolving the issue of 365 days calendar. Yeah. Questions? Right, I wasn't expecting to resolve the issue today. So the next item, and I think Chief Toma can also provide some additional perspective on this, is the need for additional programming for high-risk, high-need individuals.
Okay, and what we provided prior to COVID is not necessarily what we provide now, obviously, because of the limitations and the issues surrounding social distancing and protecting and mitigating the spread of COVID. But I can honestly say even prior to COVID, we don't have or did not have a lot of programming for the high needs, high risk inmates in our care because of design issues, staffing issues, funding issues. This is a very volatile population, so there has to be a significant level of security when we provide. But we've always provided mental health programming, whether it be crisis and then ongoing counseling. That's something we've always done with the help of the ASO, used to be the BHO. We've had a long-standing collaboration with them. So, and that along with True Blood. So we've always had mental health programming in that maximum custody special needs unit. We did attempt before COVID some group type therapy, which seemed to be very promising. But again, unfortunately, because of COVID, we cannot have this group type counseling. So hopefully that's something we can get back to. But again, our programming for this high level custody was minimal, and it's even more minimal now under COVID. Now, when we go into the dormitory area for the minimum, medium custody defendants, we have a vast array of programming. Now, before COVID, we had a large number of programming that took place in person with various counselors and program providers. Initially during COVID, we obviously had to suspend all that because, again, especially early on, before we really knew what we were dealing with, basically we were in a position where we had to shut down all programming. Since then, through various funding sources, we've been able to bring technology into those dormitories. So we pretty much re-implemented all our programming that existed before. So we have our chemical dependency program, we have our domestic violence offender program, we have AA and NA, we have anger management, we have peer support, we have our medication assisted treatment, and then folks that come in or provide services through the Butte Clinic. We have parenting classes, we have dynamic dad parenting classes. So we have, again, we're back to essentially where we once were. The only group that has not returned yet is jail ministries because they did not want to do provide services through the technology system. So, but generally speaking, through the efforts of my staff, the funding sources and technology, we've been able to bring our programming in the dormitories to pretty much where we were pre-COVID.
Thank you, Chief. But still, even if you have made a great job in bringing back to what it was in 2019, but even as you stated in 2019, there were gaps. Because they, basically what I'm hearing is this really wasn't enough, whether it's resources or money or staffing. Even in 2019, there were gaps they we needed to address, correct?
Correct. Because one thing I think I need to mention is jails are not designed to be long-term facilities. The Department of Corrections prison systems are designed to be long-term facilities. The majority of our population is pretrial. The average length of stay isn't all that long. So again, to try to develop programming for somebody who's going to be in custody for the length of time with the clients that we're talking about here is very challenging. So yes, there are recognized and acknowledged gaps in our programming for the most acute and the most in need, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and the reason that I'm asking, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna say it's not due to a lack of trying either.
And the reason that I'm asking is leading to what areas do we need, this group needs to concentrate in working through these items, because although that we have come to the levels of services prior to the pandemic, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that will be a good item for this group to concentrate this year, along with the 365 days. I don't want to come across like we need to have 10 items to work this year, because that, and again, that's too much and we will never really be able to accomplish. But I think it's the first two, as we just heard from Chief Toma, maybe a good 2 items to move forward as a group. Any comments on the last one? Any questions? I've never seen this group to be so shy. Same.
If I can add one more thing, Romero, please.
Go ahead.
And not trying to get on my soapbox and kind of repeat my mantra, but I think we should focus on programming those folks that are in our custody, especially the most acute and the special needs. I personally think, and we'll do the best we can while those folks are in our custody, obviously. But I think the focus shouldn't necessarily be on knowing that how difficult it is to program this particular group of folks in a jail environment. I think the focus should be more on how do we divert them away from this jail versus trying to figure out how we program them why they're in jail. So that's just my 2 cents. I know it wasn't necessarily part of the categories, but that's my position, and it's been my position for quite some time now.
Oh, I appreciate that. Under Sheriff?
I think Chief Toma covered that a little bit for me. I just, based on what he was saying, I'm not necessarily sure that this particular topic, even though that's what was selected, may be the best focus area for this group. I'm just wondering if there's another focus that we may want to choose, but I'll kind of leave that up to Chief Toma because certainly he is the expert in this area.
Christy?
Yeah, and just following up with that, I don't know if this would be helpful, but when Commissioner Mayhe had requested, kind of the length of time of the people that have been in jail the longest, you could see that there were really a few outliers, right? People 3 or 4 years, but it's a really, really small number. Maybe it would be helpful for this group to have a little more background specifically on the individuals that have been in jail that long to get an idea of the reason for that, because I think it goes along with what Chief Toma and Under Sheriff Brady are talking about as far as where we really need to be focusing our attention, and that putting a lot of resources into 3 or 4 individuals that may have very specific different needs, and that I just think that might give a better picture of what the resources available and what kind of individuals we have in the jail are.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? Wayne?
So I actually just met today. One of the things that we've been talking about with John and Christy is exactly, I think, one of the areas that we're focusing on here, what Chief was focusing on at least, was some of our acute mentally ill folks, and the lack of other options, both in the state and in our community, to put them. The jail oftentimes is forced, and they have no choice but to try and provide some services, and they're ill-equipped, as the Chief said, to provide those services. So we are working collectively with the TMBHO, St. Peter's. There's some other programs that are out there that we're trying to see if there's an opportunity to create a safer space for those folks, to keep the community safe. They're detained for a reason, but let's get them in a place that's more therapeutic and hopefully addressing their needs. So that may be woven in just a little bit here, Romero, in regards to that particular topic. But I agree, they're pretty focused topics that maybe expanding some of the influence or attention of this group would be beneficial as well. So I agree kind of with what Christy had said there too.
Any additional perspective on what we just discussed? And I just probably offer my own perspective in terms of what we're discussing today is not a linear process. There's other processes that are going on in terms of parallel processes. They may complement each other. What I'm trying to focus is, in this group, what will be the best items the group needs to concentrate. Because, for instance, LEAD has a different process. There is the flex unit. Through facilities, we're going to be bringing this conversation again to the board sometime this year. So there is a lot of different parallel processes. So I don't want to come across that perhaps this is just a linear process. Only those items, and that's it. Nothing else is going to happen within the system. So I just want to globalize the conversation in those terms. So what I'm hearing is certainly the 365 plus days is something the group really would like to probably hone in and get, first of all, get additional information. As Christy stated, what are the causes? Who are the ones that probably 2-3 years in the system? Would that be something that Chief Toma can provide, or who can provide that information?
I think that information would be best provided by the prosecutor's office. They have the case information.
Okay, so then you're it, Chrissy.
We can take that on.
All right.
Would it be helpful if we maybe look at anyone that's been over 365 days and give maybe a couple sentences of the background of what's going on there?
Sounds good. That would be great.
Okay.
And also I've heard from Under Sheriff Brady that perhaps the second item, the need for additional programming, high risk, maybe an opportunity to focus on a different item, because that seems to be very complex. And again, they may have a different path, as Wayne stated, with the BHO and everything else. There's a lot of components. They're perhaps also working on that area. So that's a question for the group. Go ahead, Under Sheriff.
Thanks, Romero. Appreciate it. The only thing I would say is I would maybe retract that a little bit if, like what Wayne was talking about, I think once we identify what we're talking about as far as high risk, high need, certainly if we're talking about, some kind of solution around our acute mentally ill people that are in jail. I mean, unfortunately, we're still putting a lot of people with severe mental illnesses into our facility. And so it may actually still be a very good topic for us to cover if we can just identify what we mean by high risk, high need individuals there.
Okay, Patrick?
Yeah, thanks, Romero. Just circling back to the first item, Christy, I'm happy to work with you on that. I just wanted to, rather than message you off, or just to share that I think we want to be careful with what information on each individual that we're getting back to this team, and what's relevant and what's what maybe not something that we want to share, just to put it out there, because there are cases on there that I'm very familiar with that fall into the latter category.
Absolutely, Patrick. I think we'll talk broad, very broad.
Yeah, a 30,000-foot level information wall was probably what is good for this group. So thank you for the clarification, Patrick. Good point. So before we move to the next item on the agenda, I'm going to exercise a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or sideways. So for the group to agree on concentrating on the number of individuals in the jail for 365 plus days. Do I see a thumbs up? I see everyone, so that's good. Thank you. And the second item, the need for additional programming for high risk, high need individuals. Do I see thumbs up to focus on that item as well? Frankie, you see a sideways, or that was up? Jason, sideways or up?
I guess I was going to sideways from it. It feels like we might need a little bit more information back on that one.
Yeah, that was my question, is that I wanted to kind of defer to the undersheriff and the jail just to make sure that that was something that they saw as a need. And I think that's what I heard the undersheriff say. But I don't.
And I'll divert to Chief Tillman. I know for me personally, the status of the female transition unit and the flex unit are a huge priority, but from what I'm hearing from the county manager is that we're going to maybe tackle that under a separate area. So I'll certainly defer to Chief Tillman on what he thinks on that topic.
And I'm going to defer to Captain Muldrow. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think that needs to be a focus, but I think that's a focus that we are constantly working with the BHO folks and Jason and his staff. Again, I think it's imperative. I think it's critical. I think it's necessary, but I think it's something we're constantly trying to improve upon. I would like more focus on what our options are, like you had mentioned, Under Sheriff, of trying to divert them away. And I'm not talking about the low-level offenders. I'm talking about the high risk. And I know it's a tall order because some of these alleged crimes are pretty significant, but I think there needs to be focus on these folks and what are our options. DOC is more equipped to program folks than what jails are. And if it's not, the Department of Corrections, then there's got to be another alternative, because a lot of these folks can't go to the mental health facilities in this community. They will not take them. They will not house them. They don't want to deal with them. So ultimately, where do you think they end up? They end up in a hardened corrections facility where we can manage them the best we can, and that should not be the only alternative.
Thank you. Judge Wilson?
Thank you. Consistent with what Mary Ann said, it seems like we kind of talked through this, but we need more details before we either say this is a near-term priority to discuss or take it off the table. And I don't know if Under Sheriff Brady might flesh that out for us prior to an upcoming meeting.
Well,
Marianne?
and I think after hearing Chief Toma answer, I'm having a vague recollection of a prior JRT meeting where he had handed out a population, I guess, description with basically the majority of the jail population or the capacity of, I think it was CPOD, and it being at capacity. Granted, I realize that now we are in COVID and the housing structures are a little bit different, but the housing and the needs of the jail. And so I'm thinking I would be comfortable putting my thumb up now after listening to him. But if others need more information, I understand that as well.
Maybe for next, any other comments, feedback, perspectives, questions? So good conversation. Maybe for the next meeting, we can dive into more details on the top 2 items and see if there's something we need to change, we need to update, and that we will do that at the next meeting if that is acceptable to the group. So the next item that we have in the priority is the lead updates, COVID-19 backlog updates, and the Blake updates. I think those should be on the standing items on the agenda for this group. So I don't think we really need to have a discussion. My suggestion will be to just have those as standing items on the upcoming meetings, because all of us can benefit to learn as to where we are on the lead, how we are managing the backlog, and what are the successes on Blake in order to meet the mandate. Will that work? Okay, so that's a good lead to the next item on the agenda, which we have the lead overview and updates. So, Jason?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I can take it away here. So I apologize if you've heard my spiel several dozen times at this point, but just in case you haven't, I'll do a real quick background on LEAD and what it is and where we're at. So in case anyone in the room hasn't heard of LEAD, LEAD is an acronym for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. It started in Seattle around 2011. At that point, primarily focused on drug possession charges and prostitution charges, seeing the same people frequently multiple times a week, if not multiple times in a 24-hour period. And they came up with a diversion alternative to get people connected to services with the intent of keeping them out of legal trouble and hopefully moving them towards stabilization in their lives. It was so successful that it expanded really quickly. It got a good reputation within the community, and people began coming up to officers asking to be deferred to LEAD. So they started creating what they called social contact referrals. And from there expanded to just general community referrals as well. At the service level, LEAD is a long-term harm reduction intensive case management program. And behind that, kind of foundationally, it's focused on system changes beyond just helping individuals. Like a lot of the discussions that have happened today already, it centers around bringing a lot of diverse stakeholders together to help resolve really complex issues, both for the individuals that are having frequent contact with law enforcement, as well as ways that potentially the systems can change to support people being more successful that need assistance due to behavioral health needs. So anyway, it is expanded. It started going up in a lot of different states. It's gone into other countries now. There's been a lot of local interest in LEAD down here for several years. There was an attempt a few years back, and due to a lot of issues that didn't work real well, but this local or more recent grant that the county was able to get provided dedicated funding to support the efforts, as well as some great buy-in from law enforcement and the prosecutor's office really leading this to be focused on how can we help law enforcement and how can we meet their needs more effectively, which was one of the failings first time around. So services with Thurston County LEAD have been up and running now since July. Back in July, I think we had 4 referrals into the program, no, three referrals came in July. And we've steadily trended up. We've got 75 people that have been referred into the program as of Monday. And I just got a text that we had, I think 11 more people that have been referred this week from the Deschutes relocation, we'll call it, placement in the hotel. So out of those 11 people, one of the things the team is going to try to do is help place them into STD residential treatment. But the program itself, like I said, it's harm reduction. So that means we're meeting people where they're at, both literally out in the field, in the streets, and also meeting them where they're at in regards to stages of change. So if somebody's maybe not ready to stop using, the team looks at what other harms they can work on addressing and reducing, both to themselves as well as to the community. And so far, there's been a lot of successes with the team. They've helped get people into detox and treatment, and then more like traditional linear recovery path. They've helped relocate a mom and get some kids re-enrolled in school. There's just a lot of really, really great work happening and a ton of impressive buy-in and support from law enforcement agencies. A lot of these people are really difficult to find and difficult to engage. And a lot of the successes have been a result of law enforcement taking the time to meet with case managers, take them out to where people are actually at. At least one occasion, one of the sheriffs called the team. I think they set up an appointment at 10:30 at night and called and talked to them with the people that were being referred to the program to get them engaged. And to this point, we've only had 4 people that have remained hard-nosed. Of the 75, they're all in some phase of outreach or fully enrolled in the program and receiving services. And so that's a little bit about where we're at. Like I said, there's 75 referrals. A little over 2/3 of those have been directly from law enforcement agencies. It started out with just Tumwater, Lacey, and the Sheriff's Office. And we've expanded to accepting referrals from Yelm PD, DOC. We're about to start getting referrals from the Nisqually Public Safety. And then have begun reaching out to different community-based agencies that have a lot of interaction with people that are high risk for law enforcement contact due to their unmet behavioral health needs. It's a quick summary on the background and where we're at with a little bit of numbers. I wanted to leave time for any specific questions that may have come up through this group already, or anything anybody's been wondering about. I know a lot of you have heard this spiel many times, so any questions on anything at this point?
Hey Jason, if you could, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was on mute. Hey Jason.
Yeah.
Do you mind touching on the structure of LEAD and on the different subcommittees and touching base on the roles of each of those committees, that would be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. So the LEAD program is really based a lot around community and buy-in and community direction. Like I mentioned with how we work things out, trying to focus on meeting the needs of law enforcement, it's important to have law enforcement at the table helping guide program development as well as community stakeholders. So to do that functionally, there's an operations work group, which is sort of like a staffing type group. And that's primarily referring law enforcement agencies and the case management team getting together on pretty much a weekly basis to talk about how things are going, both operationally and referrals, as well as how things are going with specific cases. And if there's any specific issues with trying to find people and make connections to referrals. So that's really crucial on both developing the relationships with law enforcement and the case managers, as well as just, connecting to people and helping them be successful. Then above that, we also have a steering committee of local government and law enforcement leadership, as well as a community advisory board. It's got a pretty diverse group at the table, both people with lived experience, service providers, law enforcement, public government, a lot of people interested in the program and helping to guide kind of how we're expanding and the way things are going. And I was going to mention too, the structure of the team itself. So there's an outreach coordinator that is an SUDP in our program. So that's somebody that's licensed to do substance use assessments and placement. They help enroll people into the program and do initial outreaches. And then there's peer case managers that have lived experience that work with the individuals and helping them navigate things. The team structure is 1 outreach coordinator and 3 peer case managers. So under the grant with the county, we have 1 team. Because of the Blake decision and how it's impacted things in my world, legislation called for funding to support expansion of programs like this. So we have another legislatively funded team to help complement those services as well. So as of January 1, we have 2 teams running now that are supporting these efforts. So it's a little bit more than you asked.
No, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Any other questions or anything?
So seeing none, thank you, Jason. So I think you're going to be, if your time allows, to be part of this agenda as we move forward, and that will be helpful to continue to hear, some of the updates related to LEAD. I'm so very pleased to hear in the last 24 hours, I think you said that, 11 new referrals related to the shoot sweep. That is something that, I think it proves the point that it's a lot of interrelations, a lot of nexus, and there are many different activities that we do and many different programs that we implement. So that's a great piece of information.
Yeah, definitely. There's a huge overlap here, especially with the discussion around how can we divert people. Almost all the people that we've begun working with are well known to multiple jurisdictions, and many of them have been at least in and out of jail, if not had long stays in jail. So this is very much the same population that we're trying to help stabilize and move towards recovery and out of the cycle of the legal system.
Thank you. So we are a little bit ahead of the schedule, which is a good thing. The gift of time is always good. So the next item on the agenda, I have an update on the Blake decision and the cases associated with that, and I have Christy Peters on that item. Christy?
Great. So as many people know, it took a little bit of time to get ramped up on the Blake cases because initially our office and public defense, we didn't have designated individuals to work on these cases. The court was able to quickly add a calendar, but we had multiple attorneys, both on the state side and the defense side, that were dealing with Blake cases, whether they were straight vacates of the orders because it was like a very simple unlawful possession controlled substance only case, or whether it was a much more complicated sentencing or resentencing where someone's housed at Department of Corrections and they could be at any of the corrections facilities anywhere in the state of Washington. So in the months leading right after the decision and getting coordinated through all of the different parties that needed to be coordinated for that, the cases were very slow. However, the pace really accelerated, I would say, starting in September of this year. Both Patrick O'Connor's office was able to hire 2 attorneys exclusively for the Blake case. Our office was able to hire 2 attorneys specifically working on Blake cases. And then we also had support staff. We have a victim advocate. We have that's reaching out to victims of cases as is statutory mandated when cases are resentenced. So for instance, just to make sure we're all talking about the same and understanding the same type of cases, even though I know everyone on here is a criminal justice professional, people are always like, what do you mean? Why is there a victim advocate for a Blake case? Well, oftentimes we're talking about homicide cases or rape cases or cases where there are domestic violence, serious domestic violence cases where there was a victim involved in the last offense, the last offense, the most current offense that put that individual in the Department of Corrections or in jail or whatever the case may be. But that person had multiple or singular unlawful possession of controlled substance offenses that were part of their criminal history. So when someone who is, let's say, in custody for a rape, and maybe on the sentencing standard guidelines, they were on an 8 on the scale of 0 to 10, or 0 to 9. But 3 of those offenses were UPCS. They now need to come back, in simplest terms, come back before the court and be resentenced instead of at an 8, at a 5. And every time there is a sentencing like that, the victims have a right to be present. So, of course, that takes time because some of these are much, much older cases and we have to locate these people or do the best we can to locate the people and resentencing. All of that wraps up to say that overall, we have handled here in Thurston County over 1,000 cases since we started with Blake, but the great majority have been in the last 4 months from September through, and my numbers are only current through December 31st of this year, or of 2021. But in that time period from June and maybe a few in April and May, but really June, July, August, and then through December 31st, there were over 400 cases that were simply quashed because the warrant outstanding was for a UPCS offense or Blake-related offense. And those cases are all done. There will no longer be bench warrants out for those individuals. There were cases that were pending that were immediately quashed and or not charged if they hadn't been charged yet and out of the system. 546 cases through that time period have appeared in front of Superior Court judge. Primarily, that's Judge Skinder, but sometimes there have been another judge that has been working in those cases, and those have been vacate orders on 546 cases so far. And then the most complicated cases to handle in court are the resentencings, and so far we've had 81 resentencings. Majority of those are individuals housed in a different Department of Corrections institution somewhere in the state of Washington. And I don't know, Judge Wilson or Patrick can remind me, do we have, I think generally we try not to have more than 6 cases scheduled for that afternoon calendar. Even if an individual has multiple cases, it still can be fairly time consuming for all of the parties because of all the details that are involved in a resentencing. So if I miscalculated on how many cases, please correct me, but I think that's my understanding of the maximum of cases that we can do on the Blake calendar generally per week right now with the staff that we have. So that is our update. Does anyone have questions?
Judge Wilson?
The only thing I would add is that's not our limit. So if we have more demand, we diverted practitioners to schedule them on our regular change of plea calendars or our evidentiary calendars, which there's a handful. And I think that's working, and we're in constant communication as to whether we need someplace else. We don't have a lot of other landing places, but we have said, if you can't do it here, then do it here. Corrections has been, Department of Corrections State has been very good about making defendants available via Zoom. And I think that's going well. I hope that the practitioners think that's going well. We heard early on that Judge Skinder runs a tight ship, and he was not wanting to have a high continuance rate, because getting the folks in front of the court from remote locations, you don't want to keep having them come back. And so I think compared to other courts, we've done a good job of using the court time.
Commissioner Messer?
Yes, good update on it's like Blake kind of has the two aspects. There's the cases that have to be fixed, and then there's the going forward and the new law and how that's working. So I'm just curious, from the prosecutor's perspective and public defense, maybe how do you feel like the Blake fix legislation is working in terms of misdemeanors and the number of drug cases that are now flowing through the system and how they're being handled and disposed of? Is it seem like it's working well, or you guys have issues with it? I'm just curious what your perspective is, because that kind of affects our jail numbers too. It's when you have, those felonies are now potentially going to be handled a different way.
I think the broad response to that is that there are minimal arrests being made on those types of cases. There are. It would be, as far as, are you talking about, are people being arrested on the misdemeanor Blake fix piece? We're not seeing very many of those, if at all.
My understanding is law enforcement's not arresting on possession, and the law was, enacted. It was so vague, and the systems that it contemplated didn't exist, and so it's kind of been sitting there in limbo, because I think every community is trying to figure it out, ours included. The undersheriff might be able to talk a little bit more about the law enforcement perspective, but given what we had going with LEAD and then the other innovations that law enforcement themselves have been doing, like the crew team in Olympia, and Lacey's got their team going, and county, I think we're getting ready to start ours, where we've got some social service outreach embedded with law enforcement. I don't know. I sense that that's actually the direction we're going to go, and that, actually doing arrests and diversions on possession. We may not get back there unless there's another legislative change. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think that's just the way it is right now, until the system kind of evolves to, to kind of catch up with the legislation. But I'd also be curious about the undersheriff's perspective from the law enforcement side.
Yeah, I certainly, can't speak for all of our partners throughout the county, but I think it's probably pretty consistent. I'll give the legislature, kudos for a valiant attempt at trying to resurrect something after the decision was made. But in all reality, like John had mentioned, the systems just aren't set up for tracking. I know there's some jurisdictions that are doing kind of some of their own internal tracking, but that makes it really difficult, when dealing with these. I think we're still ultimately hoping or waiting for a statewide kind of fix to the tracking system as it's created, or some version of a tweak to the new law. So, and I agree with what Prosecutor Thunheim said as well. I think definitely working with Jason and the LEAD program, that was really kind of the vision prior to the Blake decision that came out, was at least for simple possession type stuff, is that certainly that would be the best avenue, the best path moving forward, is through programs like LEAD in order to get these people the help that they need. We're still very aggressively going after the higher level narcotics for trafficking and other things. Our drug unit, our regional drug unit, we still have great resources from our state and federal partners, and we're still aggressively going after those type of cases and have great partnerships and support from our prosecutor's office. But yeah, I think definitely at the simple possession level, we're not seeing any arrests. And frankly, unless we have, a couple changes, I don't envision that occurring anytime soon.
The optimist in me wants to think that the folks that would have been good candidates for lead pre-Blake, that, would have been the folks being subject to arrest and then getting diverted, may in fact be the same folks that are getting there now. It's just a different pathway. It's a social referral pathway instead of an arrest diversion pathway. Or at least we're in the same population, right? I think that's probably true. I don't know that we could demonstrate that with data, but I think it's a different strategy to the same end.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I just real quick here, kudos to Wayne and Jason for all their work that they've done in that program. It is helping. We definitely had to, once we lost kind of that ability to do simple possession cases into lead, we've had to kind of refocus, how that program works. I think they've done an excellent job. And, the line level officers and deputies that are out there are making the best of it and really seeing the value of the program. So like you heard from Jason earlier, it is being utilized. And so we're proud of that and the work that they're doing.
And I'll just chime in real quick, just having a lot of involvement with all the other agencies. I'm completely in agreement with what Ray and John are talking about. We do not see non-felony drug arrests. We're not seeing them. But that doesn't mean that population isn't still needing some services. So we've had to really kind of recreate lead. We've had to recreate some of our other diversion opportunities because that population no longer has that direct access to the criminal justice system where we could divert them out. Now we got to try and figure out a way of reaching them without them coming into the justice system. And so that's, I think, what everybody's talking about and focusing on. So just in answering your question, Commissioner, the arrests aren't happening, and I don't believe they will unless, like somebody said, some of the fixes combining the 1310 consequences to law enforcement, the motivation of going hands-on for a diversion drug case where there's nothing more important to that person than their methamphetamine. There's better ways to hopefully get them help than arresting them. So I think that's been kind of consistent through at least Thurston County.
Patrick?
Thank you, Romero. Yeah, I just want a couple fine points on this. I agree with everything that was said, but funding for these positions, we sort of anticipate Blake work continuing obviously through this year and next, and that's when our funding at this point expires. I do anticipate certainly the potential for this Blake work to continue on past 2023, realistically. In addition to that, just to provide an update that as of last month, the clerk's office has started to distribute legal financial obligations to those that are entitled due to Blake relief and vacations. And by my rough math, I distributed about $100,000 worth of legal financial obligation payments to those that are affected. And just to share again with everybody here, if your office is being contacted by a member of the public that is affected by Blake and they need representation, please refer them to us, and we will put them on the list. That's it.
Patrick, your math was accurate. I neglected to say that. I have the numbers for every month that's been reimbursed, and it's $100,202.10 so far. So that was right on. But I know that if I recall correctly, Ramiro, I think the commissioners have a request as one of their legislative priorities for 2022 to get more accurate funding of Blake, which would include this because, while some of the money was funded by the state to support all of the different counties in their efforts regarding Blake, I don't believe it's even nearly enough. I think I agree with what Patrick said. I don't believe we're going to be done with this at the end of 2023.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris, and at least from my point of view, I have big hopes. This legislative session that actually will help counties to address the financial impacts of Blake. So that's my very hopeful expectation this legislative session. We're proactively working with our lobbyists and see where it goes. Judge Wilson.
Patrick or Christy, do you have a number of the number of Blake cases and sort of categories when you think about how long it will take to get to them that we haven't reached? The report that you gave Christy with the different categories of action that has been taken was, around 1,000, 3 different categories. But do you have a rough figure of what's left to do short of people who haven't contacted folks and the public defenders that we don't know about?
I'll defer to Patrick because I think their office has been receiving better numbers. Just the short answer is we were receiving so many different numbers of potential Blake from so many different sources. It was extremely difficult to sort through that to get an idea, other than to know that there were thousands out there.
Yeah, data management of the Blake decision has been an incredible challenge. The department has done a really good job in providing updated data. I'll have to get back to you on specific numbers. I know, for the category of those that are currently incarcerated, but Blake eligible to be resentenced, we're still north of 100 cases, at least as of a couple weeks ago, and we're probably still there. We still have a couple hundred people on community custody. So those individuals that are on community custody for a Blake conviction that we're working through, and then still working through all our community referrals that are eligible for just a simple vacation without a resentencing. I think we've got a couple hundred still to go, but early estimates were we had about 14,000, north of 14,000 cases, I think, that were able to be identified since 1990 from the clerk's office. So it sort of still gives you the scale and scope of the work ahead.
Thank you.
Any other comments, perspectives, questions related to this item on the Blake cases? Seeing none.
On the response, I would just echo that we're definitely serving the same population, just a different method on the provider side of things. So including those Deschutes people that we've had referred, the 86 people that have been referred to LEAD are all people that would very likely have had possession charges historically, if they did not for sure have them in their record at some point. So between that and between like the other programs that were mentioned with the co-responder programs, I think we're still trying to work together to very proactively reach people and help get them stabilized in their lives for the community as well as themselves.
Thank you, Jason. Moving on to the other bigger program that we need to address is the backlog related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The board released funding from the ARPA funds. And some of you have participated in a couple of meetings. We have worked through the Blake decision, the backlog. And I have an item for the board to consider this coming Tuesday to create temporary positions to start addressing the backlog. So just to let you know, that's where we are in terms of the positions. John, I have you listed as you want to elaborate a little more on the backlog?
I'm certainly willing to do that from our perspective, but again, this might be one of those topics where we might want to open it up and grab some viewpoints from the other parts of the system, and Romero, by the way, thank you for updating us on the funding request status. That's good news. I'm going to try not to be too redundant because I think just about everybody that I see on the screen has been to one or more of our COVID backlog meetings in terms of our trying to coordinate some resources and strategy. When we converted from Damien to eProsecutor, which was our case management system, we undertook an effort to try to identify as best we could groups of COVID backlog cases so that we could be prepared to track those in our system. And we're still working on the massive amount of data that got converted in that changeover. We kind of had, like I said, we had to do it in kind of broad categories, right? And so we're still refining some of that data. So the number that I have is not probably precise, but it gives you a good sense of the scope of it. In our system right now, we've got a little over 2,000 cases identified as COVID backlog. And those are a mixture of cases that are pre-charge, pending, and need to be reviewed for charging decision and or diversion decision or something in our office before it goes into the system. And then also cases where the trial date was, where there was a trial date that was impacted by COVID during court closure. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the entire scope of it. And now we're trying to figure out in eProsecutor a way to be able to calculate and break down in subcategories how many of those are actually pending review, how many of those are actually set for trial, so on and so forth. I'm hoping by the time we meet next, we could get more precise on that. I will say that, and I'm sure everybody knows this, just when we thought we might be getting ready to make some progress on it, Omicron came in, right? And that's a setback. So we're kind of right back where we were. The courts have suspended jury trials at the recommendation of the health department because of the risk that gets posed to jurors and other people that you have to put in a room to have a jury trial. And I heard the other day that they're expecting a peak in Omicron here sooner than perhaps what we thought. And so I think we're optimistic. Maybe we can get back to jury trials mid-February. That's what the Superior Court has tentatively set as their date to resume. And I think we all would like that to happen. But the reality of this is that the cases are, can continue to back up and pile up now for the next month. And it's just going to be that much bigger of a workload when we get started again. I think that also impacts our ability to really address some of those 365 plus people, not substantially, but I think Romero, you noted that one of the big contributors to that was in fact COVID, because a large majority of the folks that are 365 plus people in the jail are there because their cases were impacted by COVID and their ability to progress the case was impacted. That's really, I guess, all I would have in terms of update. I'd be happy to answer questions, but I also think maybe it would be appropriate to see if there's, kind of what the other perspectives are at the table on their part of the backlog.
Patrick, Judge Wilson.
I'll defer to the court first. Yeah.
Patrick, why don't you go before me and then I'll back clean up.
Sure. I agree with everything that John said. I think right now, understandably, we've suspended jury trials. I've sort of remained steadfast that the only way we're going to get out of this is if we can have long extended periods where we don't have to go into shutdowns, because that's just fundamental to the criminal justice system, that there's finality one way or the other. Either cases are being tried or resolved one way or the other to get out of the system. And we've done the best we can to get as many cases out or tried during these periods. But we are feeling the impacts, right? I think we're, probably at, north of 12 weeks collectively. And I could be wrong. I'm not, maybe it's months. I'm starting to lose track of things, but we've sustained a significant period of suspended jury trials throughout the pandemic. And even in that initial phase, we're still feeling the effects. How you quantify that financially is challenging, but we're certainly feeling those. And we'll continue. I think, frankly, we have to continue to be realistic that even though, a forecasted peak of Omicron is hopefully sometime early next month or mid next month, that may not be the end of this. And so we have to be realistic that 2022 we may have, hopefully not, more suspended periods of time. So not to be bleak about it, but that's just the reality, right? The chiefs mentioned earlier that we're dealing with, an issue in the jail right now, and we'll continue to deal with it in our community. So yeah, Happy New Year.
Okay, I'll go next. Batting cleanup isn't bringing sunshine. Wish I was.
It up for you for sunshine, Your Honor. I thought you.
Yeah, there's a little bit right now. So I was looking at the periods of time just to be precise. And so from March of 20 to August of 20, about 5 months of no jury trials. We started up trying them in August of 20. From December of 20, might have been late November, to March of 21, about 4 months of no jury trials. And then the good news is from March of last year until December of last year, we had 9 months of doing jury trials, but then we stopped doing them just before Christmas based on the public health recommendations. While we were doing jury trials during those periods of time in 2020 and 2021, we've been conducting fewer jury trials at a time than historically pre-pandemic. And so that's important to identify as well. When we didn't have to spread people out, we could use with court staff and courtrooms 3 to 4 jury trials at a time, usually not more than 3, but now we can't do more than 2 at a time for Superior Court. Before Omicron, we were starting to talk to the health officials. Could we go from 6 feet distancing to 3 feet? Would that allow us to increase the number of jury trials we could do at one time? And obviously, I feel like I jinxed the whole system by starting to talk about 6 feet to 3 feet and expanding. And now we're not doing any. Although we are optimistic, and John mentioned the projections. We talked to Dr. Abdulmalik earlier today. Optimistic that our spike will be in the next week or two, and that we'll have data about what that means if we follow what's happened in other parts of the world. So we continue to look for ways to get at the backlog. Our backlog, as we define it, is both trials, criminal jury, and civil jury, as well as some other related trial backlogs. We are able to address civil work and family law work with bench trials, but we have a backlog from periods of time where we haven't been able to do that. So I think we're all committed to developing good systems to expand our abilities to increase the number of jury trials when we're able. But definitely, this is a difficult time because we thought we were moving into a new phase with more capacity for jury trials. And as both John and Patrick have said, with conducting of jury trials and scheduling jury trials, we also get case resolutions, because if the trial is real, we get resolutions for cases that where people make settlements or charges get dismissed as you get closer to trial. Both of those things allow us to clear the backlog. On defining the backlog, we were working on how to look at it from any case impacted by a jury trial suspension. So before Christmas time, we were thinking trial or cases charged after March of last year arguably weren't impacted, although they were impacted because we had a reduced number of trials we could do. But now we basically have to relook at that because we have another jury trial suspension period. So anything in the hopper right now is obviously impacted by not being able to set cases for trial. I'm happy to answer any questions. I look forward to brighter days when we are running multiple trials at a time.
any questions, additional perspectives? Mary Ann?
Well, I don't blame Judge Wilson for jinxing us at all. I do want to say that I'm monitoring our pretrial service caseloads as cases are not resolving, or to see if they are not resolving and they are remaining on our supervision, just to make sure that our caseloads don't climb too high. I'm also looking to see about cases being on warrant status, and as they come back, how that impacts our screening and recommendation and our preliminary hearing calendars and our first appearance calendars in district court, and what that looks like, because that does impact the workloads in pretrial services, and as it does for the rest of the system.
Yeah, and that is a good, and I think also Patrick alluded to the fact that it's going to take us a while to address the backlog. Hopefully we can go back to jury trials in mid-February. You know, I share the optimism. But also, in this good point of clarification, because the positions the board will be considering creating on a temporary basis this coming Tuesday, is just the beginning. It's just the beginning to start addressing the backlog. On the group that we have created in terms of the backlog, we will continue to need to assess the progress of the backlog and determine what additional resources will be needed to continue with the process. So I believe I represent the Board of County Commissioners' desire. That is their desire, is to make sure that we have a good plan moving forward to address the backlog. So I look forward to the upcoming meetings and see what the progress is. What is the rate of resolving those cases? And I know that at some point additional resources will be needed, and I will be ready to support that effort when the time comes.
You know, one thing, Romero, I might add, since this is, you know, technically a jail resource discussion, and I don't know that I can totally explain the why on this, but I think it is good news, and that is that if the chief wants to jump in on this, our jail population, once it dropped, you know, when COVID set in and we went through our exercise to try to reduce the population as much as we could, I think we dropped it by almost a third, if I remember the numbers right, 30%, somewhere in there. And I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping that fairly stable. I've been watching it, and you know, it fluctuates up and down like the population typically would. And you know, during times of the week it gets busier and then it drops back down a little bit. So there are cases resolving. There are cases that are moving through the system involving folks who are in custody enough to prevent us from just, you know, stockpiling, if you will, the jail population. So I think the risk we've got to just pay attention to as we start to get more aggressive with this backlog is what the impact on the jail population will be. And that, I think that is a place where this group probably really needs to continue to update and watch and focus our attention.
Good point. Chief?
And I would agree with that, and I appreciate John bringing that up. That is a concern of mine, that once these cases, you know, we start addressing this backlog of cases, you know, what those outcomes are going to be as far as who's going to be taken into custody or sentenced to you know, county jail time. But again, I mean, I was in great fear of the Blake decision and having all these folks coming over from DOC, but we were blessed with DOC and everybody agreeing to do it by video, so we avoided that. So I'm hopeful we can work to do the same when we start looking at these backlog cases on how to, you know, mitigate those impacts and maybe look at various correctional options programs, EM, work release, some other alternatives for a lot of these folks.
And I know the First Look program got the low priority, but I'm not really concerned about that, because that in and of itself is, you know, I guess you could have called it a program, but the reality of First Look is it was more about a process and a philosophy. And our intention is to address the backlog using that same methodology to try to look for diversion opportunities from the moment we take the first look at the case, which is literally where that name came from, and see if we can, look for opportunities to keep those who don't need to be in the system out of the system, or to minimize use of incarceration for those who don't need to be incarcerated. And that's, I think, going to be our strategy, to try to help Todd with his jail population as much as we can.
Great. Mary Ann?
I also think as stakeholders, as we look at the public safety assessment, the risk assessment tool and the validation that we received, and look at potentially implementing a new risk assessment tool in our system, it may help us look at who to put in jail and who not to, and with conditions of release, and help us with this respective issue that we're looking at addressing as well.
Thank you.
So to point, looking at impacts to the jail population, I think that tools that we have available, what tools we may want to look at implementing, there's a lot that we can be looking at.
Yeah, your connection was skipping for a little bit, Mary Ann, but I think we got the gist of your comments. So that will put us right on the schedule based on the agenda that we have for you. So at this point, I'd like to probably just walk through what is the next steps for the next meeting. We'll be dive into a little bit more into the number of people in the jail, 365 plus days. Christy's going to take the lead and provide additional information. Keep it at a high level, protecting that information of those individuals involved within that category. It also will bring the need for additional programming of high risk, high need individuals. And the Sheriff's Office will help us to navigate through that. And we'll dive into those two items in more detail next meeting. And then at that point, we'll confirm whether those will be the focal points, at least for this group now. And also, we agree that we're going to have the standing items as a matter of update related to the lead, the Blake decision, and the backlog updates. Did I miss anything? With no additional, one last opportunity for comments or suggestions or perspectives. Seeing none, I really appreciate the time. Great meeting, great conversation. I mean, I benefit a lot from just the opportunity to have all the partners in the system be in a single, in this case, Zoom, but just to share the different perspectives. For me, at least, is absolutely beneficial. So thank you all for everything that you do. Bye-bye.
Bye.